So let's talk about the grid. And what is the grid? So if we look inside of our viewport area here, right in the center, we have this object of these lines that are running through. And the grid is a super useful tool. So if I just rotate around with Alt and left mouse button, we can kind of position ourselves in 3D space. So we know if we're kind of heading backwards, left or right, or up and down. And as I move the camera around, it gives me a really nice reference for where we are positionally. And if you pay close attention, you can actually see down here in this left-hand corner, we have a coordinate system with X, Z, and Y that also rotate with us when we move the grid around. So that's super handy when we start kind of dealing with assets in the future here, or 3D models. So a quick rule of thumb is usually the very, very center of a grid is referred to as the origin or as 0, 0, 0 space. So the very, very center means that if you think about this as a two-dimensional Cartesian plane, right? It's that we have positive, negative, right? And then we have a third axis that goes up and down, which is Y, and that goes positive or negative. Now, I might want to make a floor or have my character standing on the ground. So when you export or you start messing with 3D models, it's very important that we position our objects relative to the very center of basically this grid, which entail is the very center of, if you can think about it, the world in which the object is being created. Now, how do we edit this grid? Like, what can we do with it? Well, the first thing we can do is we can turn it on and off. If we ever need to turn it off and on, right up here in the viewport, there's a little button that looks like a grid, and it's blue, which means it's active. We can just left click on it to turn it off. Now, it becomes very disorienting to know where we're at. We don't have any models right now, so let's just turn it back on. And the next thing we want to look at is how do we adjust its settings? And one of the fast ways is we can just right click on this little icon, and you're going to see right here an option called Grid Options. So I'm going to left click on that. And inside here, we have a few different options. So right here, you can see it says size, and it says length and width, and then grid lines every, and then subdivisions. Well, what does that all mean? So to kind of make it a little easier, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this slider for subdivisions down to 1. And I'm going to click just the apply button, not apply and close, just apply. So what do we see? Well, we see that a lot of the lines went away. Okay. The next thing to make this a little simpler is instead of 12, let's set it to 10. And so now it's 10, 5, 1, and I'm going to hit apply. So what do we see now? Well, we have the center, we have our two main axes, which are these darker lines. And so what is it saying? The grid is in length total 10 units, and every 5 units, so right here, 5 units and 5 units, we have a line. This grid, again, goes in two directions, positive and negative. So we have 5 units this way of the 0 and 10, I should say, and then 10 units going this way, 10 units this way, and we have a line every 5. So that totally makes sense. So the first option here is how big do we want to make our grid? And then how many units should we have a line? And then if we want to get lots of fidelity, let's say that every 5 here, but within each one of those, there's another 5 divisions. So now from this point to the outside edge here, we have 25 lines. And then from this point to this point, we have 25 lines. Because each one of those 5, or I should say, 5 and 5, so actually 10 on each side, sorry. So we have 5 subdivisions and 5 more subdivisions. So we can get a little more granularity if we want to that way. Personally, I usually just leave subdivisions at 1, but if you ever want to put your grid back to default or any other setting for the future reference, you can always go up this edit button, left click, reset the settings. This will put it back to the factory default. So if you ever get like a tool messed up and you're like, I don't know what it was set to, left click on that and click apply. So our grid is back to the default Maya grid. Now, if we bring that back up, so again, I just right click on the little grid icon here, grid options, you'll notice something interesting is it says it's in units, which just means it's undefined. So how do we find out what size, if it's using metric or imperial or whatever, inches, millimeters, what is this scene set up to be? What are those units? And so what we need to do is we need to find out. And how we do that is we go to Windows at the top, we go to Settings and Preferences, and then we go to Preferences, which is the very first option off that list. So I'm going to left click. And in here, what we're really seeing is all the preferences for Maya. And it's pretty simply broke down that each one of these categories on the side is showing us specific options that pertain to just that one category. And what we're looking for is an option in this side on the left here called Settings. So as soon as I click on Settings, we get to see all the options that pertain to that. And the one that we're interested in right here is called Working Units. And currently, Maya is set to centimeters. So if for some reason you need it to be set to inches or to yards, this is where you would come to change out your options. So as soon as you change it, you would click Save, and then your grid would now be, as it is currently, in centimeters. So we would know that, again, if I come over to the grid, I right-click Grid Options, that each one, the total extent is 12 centimeters in each direction, so 24 in total. So feel free to change these to whatever your project would need. If you need to be something more realistic or accurate, that's how we go about changing it. So in conclusion, the grid is a helpful way for us to be able to orientate our model. The directions do matter, either being x positive minus, z minus, z plus, or y plus or y minus. We should usually try to respect what is referred to as the grid origin, which is the very center of kind of the world of the Maya. So we should work pretty closely to this when we're making certain models. And if we need to change the size, we can change it or we can turn it off. So hopefully that's a primer on the grid and its importance for when we make models.